Testament text from 1 Kings today, and there are a lot of wonderful stories about the prophet Elijah in our Bible, and this is one of the very first ones in his ministry. Just to put some context around this story, here's a little Old Testament history 101 for you. The 12 tribes wanted a king, and so they received a king in Saul, and then David, and then Solomon, and all those 12 tribes were called the United Kingdom. And so they were fine with one king, all the 12 tribes spread across a great land. When Solomon died, his son Rehoboam took over, and he enslaved the Israelites and put a lot of taxes on them. And so 10 of the tribes decided they didn't want any part of that kingdom. And so the kingdom split into the north and the south. Jerusalem was the worship center in the south, and it was also called Judea. And in the north, the capital became Samaria, and it was called Israel. So you've got the kingdom in the north, the northern kingdom, and the southern kingdom. Elijah is a prophet in the northern kingdom. Okay? He is a prophet at the time of King Ahab. King Ahab was a very nasty fellow. He did not do well in the eyes of the Lord, and to show the type of individual he was, the Bible says this about him in chapter 16 of 1 Kings. Ahab, the son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than those before him. He did more to provoke the Lord, the God of Israel, than did all the kings of Israel before him. This guy's a bad dude and does not follow the ways of God. He marries a lady called Jezebel, Queen Jezebel. She's no better than he. She is not from the 10 tribes. She is from the outside, from an area called Phoenicia, and it is the northern boundary of the northern kingdom, way up there, right on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea. And so she has come from Phoenicia, and so when she came, she brought a lot of security for the northern kingdom, because the Phoenicians were the ones and the Assyrians trying to attack the northern kingdom. So she brought some security for them. What she also brought was her worship of multiple gods. And so they brought a lot of artifacts, and one of the main gods that they worshiped was Baal. And that was the god of thunder and rain. And so they created temples around the area to worship all these other gods instead of worshiping the Lord of Lords, the Lord of Israel. And so both King Ahab and Jezebel together were evil and ruthless. They killed many, many prophets and priests during the time. And so Elijah comes on the scene, and he tells them this. He says, "As the Lord, the God of Israel lives, whom I serve, there will neither be dew nor rain in the next few years except by my word." This is significant because Ahab and Jezebel have completely blown up commandment number 1, haven't they? You shall serve no other gods before me. And they actively worship this god Baal, who is the god of rain and thunder. And so Elijah says the God of Israel is going to bring a drought. And your God is not going to be able to do anything about it. And it will serve to demonstrate to the people how powerful and almighty the Lord of Israel is, our true God is. That their small g God can't stop a drought, even though he is the God of rain. Okay, so Elijah is public enemy number 1 now. And they want to kill him. And so God is faithful to Elijah and protects him and tells him in a dream get up, go east to the far side of the Jordan River, and stay there. And there will be water there for you, even though there's a drought in the land. There will be water there for you. And I'm going to command the ravens to feed you morning and night. The birds will come and feed you morning and night. So Elijah is obedient to God. He's delivered this warning to Ahab and Jezebel that there's going to be this drought. Their god, Baal, can't do a thing about it. And he's hightailing it now eastward, as God has told him to do. I don't know about you, but I don't think I want to be Elijah at this point, right? They're wanting his head on a platter. God's told him, now go east. I'll provide you shelter and water, and birds will feed you. Sure, God. So he does, but he is obedient to them. And it says in verse 5 of our reading today, it says just before our reading started today, so he did what the Lord told him. He was obedient. So the drought persisted, and God did just as he has promised for Elijah. The ravens did come morning and night, and when the water finally did dry up, he told Elijah, get up and go to Zarephath. It says, go at once to Zarephath of Sidon and stay there. I have commanded a widow in that place to supply you food. So he went. So again, Elijah is trusting God to provide for him, and he's willing to go. Again, this is a pretty arduous trek. Zarephath is in Phoenicia, the home of Jezebel. He is going into the middle of enemy territory. It's quite a journey. It's over 90 miles. It's over very hilly, mountainous terrain as he heads west to the coast of the Mediterranean Sea, and then he's got to go north up the coast to Sidon, to Zarephath, right where Jezebel is from. Remember, Jezebel wants his head on a platter. Sure, God, let me go. And he doesn't question God. Just says, so he went. Would you blame Elijah if he said, no thanks, I don't want to go? If he said, seriously, Lord, you want me to travel how far? Into enemy hands? To be fed by a widow who is Phoenician? Who probably doesn't have anything to provide me? Widows of the time had no means to support themselves. And this widow has also been experiencing this drought for how many years? Is she truly going to be able to provide for him? But it says, so he went, and he didn't ask any questions. Elijah arrives at the gates of the city, and that's where our text picks up this morning. He arrives at the city at the gates and asks a woman for a drink and a little something to eat. And the woman replies in a manner that we probably expect. She goes, I don't have enough for you. I don't have enough for me and my son. I just have enough to make a little bit, and then we're going to die. She's been suffering this prolonged drought. And she says to him, just so matter-of-factly, as surely as the Lord your God lives, she replied, I don't have any bread. Only a handful of flour in a jar and a little oil in a jug. I'm gathering a few sticks to take home and to make a meal for myself and my son, that we may eat and die. Those are definitely words of profound scarcity, aren't they? I'm going to have my last meal. But Elijah says, do not be afraid. That's what the angels always say when they come. And what Jesus says, do not be afraid. Go home and do as I have said, But first make a small cake of bread for me and from what you have, and bring it to me. And then make something for yourself and your son, for this is what the Lord, the God of Israel, says. The jar of flour will not be used up, and the jug of oil will not run dry until the day the Lord gives rain on the land. So again, we may expect, and perhaps rightfully so, that she would question what Elijah said and tell him that she can't help. Go find someone else. Leave me alone. You're an Israelite. I'm a Phoenician. I don't need to listen to you. But look what she does. She went and did as Elijah told her. This woman is displaying tremendous faith and obedience to the God of Israel. God is faithful to his promise. Elijah was cared for when he was on the east side of the Jordan River. And now he's being cared for by this woman. The woman's flour and oil never run out. And later in the story, when her son dies, Elijah brings him back to life. God is faithful, and he's in the midst of the story. Elijah and the widow both trust God and acted in faith when it didn't seem to make earthly sense to do that. They're willing to act and trust what they were told. So, I said all of that for this message this week, which is this. Both the widow and Elijah received the promises of God, and it was the basis for what they did next. They received the promises of God, and it was the basis for what they did next. God is present in their story, and God is present in our story. God's promise is that there is life out of death, hope out of despair, and abundance out of scarcity. And that promise started in the Old Testament and is the foretaste of the resurrection of Jesus Christ that we claim in life and death and the resurrection of Jesus. The challenge for us, though, is do we truly trust and receive the promises of God and make that the basis for what we do next? Because it's challenging, because the narrative of this world runs contrary to the narrative of God's promise. What the world tells us is opposite of God's world. This world's narrative this week alone, yet another mass shooting in California. Those crazy wildfires wiping out entire towns in California this week. The pictures of that look apocalyptic, of just everything burnt out. And that fuels fear and despair and doubt in us. But God's narrative reminds us of these things. That God is still on his throne. Jesus is the King of kings and the Lord of lords. The power of death was defeated on the cross. The tomb remains empty. The power of the Holy Spirit resides in us. And prayer is powerful and effective. And God is always with us to the ends of the age. God was with Elijah and the widow. God is with us in our story. And as children of God, and we are heirs of those promises of God. And we're called to trust and receive God's promises of grace and mercy, and act in faith like Elijah and the widow. truly pray for myself and for you that we can receive God's promises and make it the basis of what we do next. That we receive God's promises and make it the basis of what we do next. Embrace daily God's promise for your life, because the world's narrative runs contrary to God's narrative for us. Receive God's promise and make it the basis of what you do next. Amen.